Hi there, welcome to Flashpoint here on clickondetroit.com. I'm afraid no Flashpoint for the next 3 Sundays on air due to our coverage of the 2016 Summer Olympic Games. But there is still so much going on, so much to talk about that rest assured, we'll be bringing you our Flashpoint conversations here online on our Facebook page for Click on Detroit and here on clickondetroit.com. This morning's conversation is with me, Sandy Barua, the CEO of the Detroit Regional Chamber, also a former Bush appointee in the George W. Bush administration, and Nancy Kaffer, columnist for the Detroit Free Press. Here we go. Gang, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
We've got a lot to discuss that I want to dig into. First off, as we let's start with our poll that we did along with the Detroit News, which shows us that here we are about a week after the events in Philadelphia and 2 weeks after Cleveland. We've got Hillary Clinton leading Trump in Michigan by about 9 points. The bump you'd expect after the Democrats' convention, or is it telling us really where the race is?
Well, first of all, I think the Democrats had a fabulous convention. And watching it on television, it looked like one of our conventions from the George W. Bush days. It was patriotic. It was well organized. I mean, they even got the Taylor Swift song to cue right at the right moment when they were going to the national broadcast. I mean, that's something that we did during our convention. So fabulous convention for the Democrats. And yes, you'd expect a significant bump. And, you know, if Donald Trump really expects to win this, he cannot be 9 or 10 points down in a state like Michigan. He's got to flip and he's got to turn the tables on some of these traditionally Democratic states, and he's clearly not doing that.
He's going to be here on Monday speaking to the Detroit Economic Club, and I guess he'll have his chance. It was interesting, Nancy, I've talked about this a couple of times online. I met what I thought was the real unicorn while I was in Philadelphia, and that was somebody who was trying to decide between Trump and Clinton. I wasn't sure there was a lot of those, but this is a guy, a truck driver from Michigan, who has always voted along union lines his whole life, never has voted for a Republican. But he's a guy who has watched all these union jobs leave the state, and he feels like Donald Trump is speaking to him in a way that Hillary Clinton hasn't been. He's not sure what he's doing yet, but I think that's an interesting place to be, given Michigan and what Sandy's saying.
I think there's definitely, obviously, a large pool of people who feel that they haven't been talked to by either political party. Obviously, why Trump was able to sweep up in the Republican Party. And I think that while many of them may go along with or not mind Trump's xenophobic, racist rhetoric, probably a lot more of them are regular people who have lost jobs, they feel left behind in the economy, and those are legitimate problems. Yeah. And you know, the sad truth is there aren't manufacturing jobs coming back in large numbers. There isn't a big the stuff that Trump says he's going to do isn't going to help those guys. It is up to Hillary Clinton to articulate a plan for how she's going to reach those people. Because whoever is elected our president is going to be president of the whole country, which includes people who feel like they haven't worked in years, that their work has been, they're paid less for what they used to do. These are Americans who have real concerns, and our president has to reach them.
It's a great issue. Sandy, it's been now about 10 years since I made my first trip to China. We did a documentary called The China Syndrome, Where Did All the Jobs Go? And it was a look at whether that manufacturing was, at the time, it looked like it was leaving forever, and that eventually nothing would be made here anymore. Do you feel like that's where we are now?
So, most of the job loss when it comes to manufacturing has not been due to manufacturing in other countries. What most people don't realize that most of the manufacturing job loss has been due to efficiency. It is how things are produced. I mean, look at the River Rouge plant right here in our region. That used to have something like 45,000 workers just at that one plant. Yeah. They actually produce more vehicles now, primarily F-150s out of there, but with, I think, 1/10 of the workforce. So that has nothing to do.
Same output.
Same output, maybe even more, right?
Yeah, bigger output.
But and certainly bigger vehicles.
Yeah.
But so we have to understand that that's the major part of it. So the challenge, I think we have a broader challenge, and you know, every time I get asked about trade issues, it's from my position at the Detroit Regional Chamber, it's one of the most difficult things I answer, because you can't put it on a bumper sticker and you can't capture answering a trade question in a sentence in a newspaper column. Because here's why: we as a nation, since World War II, both Democrats Democratic and Republican presidential administrations and our nation has said, listen, our national goal is to raise the standard of living across the planet. So we go to war less often with nations, and that has worked, right? Japan was a warrior, now they're one of our dear friends. Germany was a warrior, now one of our dear friends. We have friends all across the planet because we have these strong economic relationships and the standard of rising living. Just one last point, right? But now what's happened is that what we forgot to do from the 1960s onward is how do we make sure that we're increasing our level of game? So everyone else has raised theirs, we haven't raised exponentially enough.
I thought there might be a few moments you wanted to jump in there, Nancy.
Oh no, I mean I think that Sandy's dead on. That it's very easy to say you've lost your job because of bad trade deals and immigrants who will work for less, but that's really not the truth, and that's why the stuff Trump isn't saying isn't going to bring any jobs back. But I mean, one of the things we're able to do through trade deals is dictate terms that we'll deal with other countries on. We can talk about working conditions, potential for unionization, and stuff like that. So by improving standards in other countries for workers, we can make our workforce more competitive by leveling some of that playing field. That's a tool we have to use that we don't get if we say trade deals are just bad.
Okay, this is going to be an odd show because I'm going to agree with Nancy a lot today. And then Nancy and I we're dear friends, but we never agree, right? But so TPP is a great example, right? So a lot of signs of the Democratic Convention and the Republican Convention.
The Trans-Pacific Partnership, which has been, I should quickly point out, is still the huge sticking point among the Bernie Sanders crowd.
And the Trump crowd, right?
Yes.
So no Trans-Pacific Partnership. So here's what people
really interesting intersection between those two
holding
groups.
Those signs forget. If the United States doesn't go into the TPP, it's going to happen anyway. It's just going to happen without the United States input. It's going to happen without the strong workplace protection. It's going to happen without the strong environmental protection. And then the Pacific Rim is going to have this great free trade agreement. We're going to be left out, and we're going to be outside looking in. So the reason why even President Obama, who is not George W. Bush, wants the TPP so bad is so he can get those environmental protections in, so he can get those worker protections in. But the people holding up the signs just saying walk away from it, it's actually not in their best interest.
And Sandy, you said earlier that you thought that the Democratic Party was taking a page out of the Republican Party's playbook at the convention. I say I'm happy to see a Republican taking a playbook out of the Democratic playbook, which is to say these are really complicated issues with a lot of factors. They can't be boiled down. I mean, these are really complex issues with no easy solution. And that's one of the problems is, and I think particularly for Hillary Clinton, who whether you love her or hate her is a wonk who has detailed plans for like literally everything, is communicating those plans to voters in a way that they can really engage with, because it doesn't lend itself to sloganeering. It doesn't, it's not an easy thing to catch on to, and to say here's a complicated and incremental and slow-moving way to get to where we want to go is not a thing that has people screaming revolution and hopping into their, out to march. So
let's talk a little bit about Donald Trump, given that he's coming next week. Yes, in fact, I'm curious as to your thoughts on this, because you've been really candid on Flashpoint for months now with your struggle. But I'm wondering now, there was this talk this past week. Donald Trump had a pretty bad week, getting in a strange fight with a Gold Star family, on and on, and then
videotapes that don't exist.
Getting down into the weeds on some weird things. Yeah. And now you've got people talking about, for a while there you were talking about we need an intervention with Donald Trump, that you can somehow mold him and make him a better candidate. You've also got, on the other side of that, you've got the Meg Whitmans who've decided, I can't make him that. I'm going to have to go support Hillary. Where are you right now? Can you do anything with Donald Trump to make him a Republican candidate?
So I don't know Donald Trump, right? Yeah. And I've never even been in the same room with him, and I won't be there on Monday. As much as I'm glad that the Detroit Economic Club is having him, I don't want.
You're not going to attend.
I'm not going to attend because here's why I don't attend. I'd have to applaud to be polite, and I refuse to be impolite. And since I wouldn't be able to bring myself to applaud this man, I just said it's better for me not to show up. But I'm glad the Economic Club is having them. I just chose not to be rude and show up and not applaud. Right. So my friends who are primarily, centrist Democrats to Republicans of all stripes fall into three categories, and they're almost a third. A third of them actually found a way to support Donald Trump. Some of them have surprised the holy heck out of me that they've actually said, I'm going to pull the lever for Trump. A third of them have actually said, I'm going to go Hillary Clinton, which has equally surprised me because, as unstable as Donald Trump is, Hillary Clinton couldn't find the truth with a flashlight in two hands, right? And then there's a third of my friends who are kind of where I am, which is we're going to write somebody in or probably vote for Gary Johnson. We're just going to, it's basically a protest vote.
Or sit it out.
No, I will.
You would vote.
I would never not show up.
You'd vote. Yeah.
I want to point out that PolitiFact has found Hillary Clinton lies less than every other candidate in the race, including mainstream Republican candidates like Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio. I will say, Sandy, I think you and I disagree about a lot of stuff, but I respect you and I respect your beliefs because I know you're a thoughtful person. And so I know a lot of the same Republicans that you're talking about who are having this real crisis where they can't, they don't know what to do here. I'm going on Monday. In the media section, you don't have to clap. We never clap.
No cheering in the press
credentials. I'll come sit with you.
No cheering in the press box.
But what I'm really curious about is this is not the crowd that comes to a Donald Trump rally. This is a very different. This is a crowd of business people. It's a moderate Republicans. It's a diverse crowd. There will be African American, Hispanic, Arab American folks in that audience. And what I'm going to be really curious to see is if he's able to deliver a different kind of speech to this crowd.
His people are saying it's going to be a major economic policy advance. I'm not sure what that means.
Right. We have yet to see that from him.
Nothing specific.
I'm really waiting to see that. But he's not going to be in a rally where there's people, who are willing to hustle a protester out or to hold up signs with really obscene, awful things about Hillary on them. This is a very different crowd, and how he's able to tailor his message, if he's able to deliver a major economic speech, if he's able to stay on script, if he's able to, which he did at the convention in his speech. It was, but it is going to be interesting to see how what he delivers to that crowd, how he delivers it, and I wonder how many people who normally are regular attendees of Econ Club meetings will sit out.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting to watch what happens with the crowd.
I think it's going to be a sold-out crowd. I'm very glad that, the Detroit Economic Club is one of the great microphones in the country. We're fortunate to have it. One of the best-run organizations that I know of, and they will do everything to make this a good event for the region and for Mr. Trump.
And interestingly, from what I'm hearing, he does plan to do. The Econ Club traditionally has a Q&A section after the speaker, and he is, at least the last I heard, planning to do the Q&A, which is, I'm also really interested to hear what some Econ Club members have to ask
Maybe
him.
more interested in that. Yeah, I'd love to see more in this section. In fact, we've not heard near enough with reporters, especially with Hillary Clinton, I might add. She needs to finally, I think, stand up and do a news conference.
She hasn't done one in almost a year.
She hasn't done one in ages, which has been a tough thing. The weirdest thing I thought of this past week was Joe Scarborough the other morning with his recollection of Donald Trump. He had talked to somebody who had done an international policy briefing with Donald Trump, and that three times, according to Scarborough, 3 times during that hour, Donald Trump asked him about nuclear weapons, and if we have them, why can't we use them? That's a little creepy.
It seems like I feel like my 5-year-old could answer that question pretty handily.
Bad idea to use them. On the other side, though, we had an interesting dust-up fodder for the other side. How big a deal does this strike you, that this has come to light, the way that this $400 million was transferred to Iran in cash, in foreign currency, on pallets, in the dead of night, and it just happened to arrive just before the hostages were released this past winter?
So this story's just coming out, and I feel like I need a lot more information to weigh in on what it means and who might have acted badly or who might have acted well. I'm really not trying to dodge here. I don't feel like I have enough information to weigh in with a helpful opinion.
I think I could. First of all, I was not supportive of the Iran deal. I did not think it was the right deal for our nation to cut. Having said that, this payment
is the Iran nuclear deal, which was apparently wrapped into this.
President Obama and Secretary Kerry. I think it threw our friends in Israel under the bus. I think it was not a good deal. However, having said that, this payment should not concern us as a nation. So when the Shah was deposed, we had an arms transaction in place. We had actually accepted money from the country of Iran for arms, which we obviously froze when they took our embassy. We never returned that money, and we never gave them the arms. So it went to the International Tribunal for reconciliation, and it had to go. And actually, I think President Obama had a very good press conference yesterday, and he explained all this. And he said, listen, the reason we didn't cut him a check, the reason we didn't do wire transfer is because we have no formal banking relationship with him. Because by law, there is no formal banking relationship. So we put in pallets, and actually we did actually move pallets of money during the Iraq War for certain kinds of payments, because that's how you get things done. So I know it looks like a Jason Bourne movie plot, but it looks far worse than it really is.
I'm going to write down what Sandy just said, because he has actual information, which is why I didn't want to weigh in. Thanks, Sandy.
The captors, however, apparently were telling the hostages, you're not going anywhere until that plane arrives.
Yeah.
So if the other side believes that it's money that it's ransom money, isn't it ransom money?
Well, listen,
or no?
I think, I think both sides can look at it differently. I think Iran was waiting for that money to come, and they were going to release the hostages. So clearly, from their perspective, it was, listen, you give us the money you owe us, and we're going to call it ransom money, and we'll release the hostages. For us, it was like, listen, this is money we owe you anyway. So if it's money we owe you, and we can get our hostages back, and it's part of the broader deal, which I didn't like, but fine, it is part of a broader deal, I think that's fine.
Well, as somebody who was against the deal in the first place, I think your thoughts on it are very interesting.
Again, enough time in Washington, D.C. Now, I never dealt with pallets of money. I want you to know, but
that's an interesting petty cash situation when there's $400 million in Swiss francs and euros laying around.
I was able to buy coffee, though.
There you go. Let's talk a little bit about. We had a primary this past week. By the way, the fun of doing it here online, no commercial breaks. Have you noticed that? We're just charging right through.
Nancy, I could hold up our company names to halfway through.
So we had a primary this week, which was news to 83%, 87% of Michigan registered voters.
Yes.
Wait, 83? 83% of Michigan's registered voters.
Was it news to them, or was
ballots.
there just not anything there to get them excited?
I don't know. So I think two things. Number one, I think that a lot of people don't really legitimately know about primaries. I'm surprised regularly by my personal friends who I say, "Oh, you're voting Tuesday, right?" And they say, "Oh, we're voting Tuesday." We don't, and I think some of that's on us. We all have the mindset that the general election is the big deal, and even though so many races now are decided in the primary.
Although fewer of them this time around, it seemed. There was there wasn't a ton of drama. We had a really interesting race, I thought, in the 10th up in to replace Candace Miller.
Sort of surprising too how it turned out.
Yes, interesting. The Virgil Smith, but not as much as you would expect in a place, because I feel as you do about primaries.
And we had a credible challenger to John Conyers in Detroit City Clerk Janice Smithford, who lost. But that was an interesting race too. It seemed pretty sure that Conyers was going to hold on to it. But the thing is, but a lot of races year over year do get decided in the primaries, and they're decided by incredibly small numbers of people. About 1.5 million people voted on Tuesday, out of 9 million people in the state and about 7 million registered voters. So I think to some extent people still, even though so many races we know so many races get decided in the primary, I don't think that information has seeped out.
Gets out that way.
To be common knowledge. That's just my take on it.
Anything interesting in the primary to you?
Well, other than that, the primary is basically the only race that matters these days, the way that districts are cut, right? If you're in a Republican district and you win the Republican primary, you almost have a free shot in the general, and the same as with the Democratic. So I agree with Nancy. There's going to be lightning that's going to come down and strike us.
No, this program's all about building bridges. The zoo millage passed, and right now I just don't.
But that had broad support.
It had very broad support.
It's I think the average person pays $10 a year on the zoo millage. It's an amenity we all.
But I think that millages, which people used to rubber stamp, I think it's an interesting time for a lot of these questions, which brings us to this interesting question coming up in the fall. Now, for a week ago, it looked like the RTA vote itself was dead. That L. Brooks Patterson and Mark Hackel weren't interested in letting it even get on the ballot. Those doubts were assuaged this past week. They are neither going to support nor campaign against, but where do you think we are on this piece of...
So, RTO polling suggests that there is support for the millage. I think it's more than 50% approve when you sort of pose it to them as do you support this concept? And then when you fill in details, it goes up into the 60s. So hopefully this is true. I think what we've learned about millages is that when they are very specific, like a zoo millage, the DIA millage, people are willing to support it. When it's a police or fire millage, people see the value and they feel like they're able to easily track what they're paying for. When it's a broader millage, like the Wayne County RISA millage that failed a few years back, people don't really feel like they have a grasp on what it is. They're not as willing to support it. So the challenge will be for the RTA people to communicate what this millage is for in concretest terms as possible. I think they have a shot. They've got to communicate.
It seems to me, Sandy, that where a lot of this is going to be decided, interestingly enough, is going to be Oakland and Macomb. I think the folks in Washtenaw with this rail component of connecting Ann Arbor to Detroit, I think Wayne County obviously has its own larger interests in a different way. But it feels to me that that's where this will be decided in those other two counties.
Yeah, and to the polling that Nancy's referring to actually shows strong support in Macomb County and Oakland County, and even some of the northern portions of Oakland and Macomb County. And you know what we need to do.
Well, then how did you feel when it was looking like Hackle and Patterson were going to let it
so what
fall
was interesting about the last-minute hurdle that was presented, it wasn't about the millage, it wasn't about the master plan, it was about the federal money that goes to the state that gets divided between the Detroit bus system and the smart bus system. And it wasn't really about that, it was really about how do you change the formula.
Yes.
So that was, listen, and that was put in statute about 2 or 3 years ago.
And was there veto power over it?
And everyone agreed to it 2 or 3 years ago, but at the last minute there was some, so they worked through that. So I'm perfectly happy with where things stand right now. I think actually at the end of the day, the concerns that were raised were relatively legitimate concerns, but I think what we need to be able to do as a region, we need to be able to look at things as a whole. I mean, if we look at every infrastructure project or every expenditure of funds, is like going, does everyone get exactly the same portion? Then we would never have any infrastructure built at all. In fact, people in apartments would never pay for electrical infrastructure out in suburban areas because it costs a lot more to run roads, run gas lines, electrical lines to rural areas and suburban areas. But people in dense urban areas pay for that, through shared cost system, because as a society we think roads and electricity are good for everybody. And the same thing is about regional transit, because we think that if you want a region that works, if you want a region that is growing in economic prosperity, you have to give people the opportunity to make money and spend money, and that means getting people from point A to point B.
But we haven't bought that over the years, right? I mean, we're still the largest metropolitan area. We're still selling.
Yes. I hope someone is writing down how many things Sandy and I are agreeing on today. But we have to.
I'm gonna get fired.
I know. She might too. I may be the only one still with a job at the end of the day.
Every successful American metro area has a successful transit, regional transit system. You can't. One of the things that Sandy's saying is this hurdle that people have to get over. The nature of a transit system is it links densely populated areas to densely populated areas. A transit system can't stop at every cul-de-sac in a suburb and be a viable system. So by nature, some densely populated areas are going to have more bus routes. It's just the way it works. Yeah. And you kind of have to get past that knee-jerk reaction that I'm not getting out what I'm putting in here, and see how the broad benefits are spread across the region. That's huge. But yeah, we haven't gotten. Historically, we have not bought into this idea as a region, and I think that this last-minute squabbles about governance on the board go back more to our history of regional distrust. Some fears that there's going to be some Wayne County, Washtenaw, Detroit alliance that's going to cram bad changes down Oakland and Macomb's throats. I personally didn't see that happening, because the Wayne County representatives represent the whole county, not just the city of Detroit. They didn't seem like the votes were there to have that kind of evil cabal on the board. But the point is they sat down and they compromised, which people don't do enough of.
I think Brooks is always fairly eloquent about this. You can agree or disagree, but forever he has said if something is neutral for Oakland and good for Detroit, he's for it. If something's good for both, he's for it. But if something is bad for Oakland, and if there's no value, even if it's good for Detroit, he can't support that given the oath that he's taken and who he's supposed to be representing.
My personal opinion is that Brooks Patterson needs to recalibrate the parameters by which he gauges good for Oakland. Oakland County cannot thrive and survive without a healthy metro area, and specifically a healthy core city. They're called suburbs. You can, they rely on the herb, right?
Understood.
You can't have
but when Detroit was really struggling, Oakland County was the wealthiest county, one of the 5 wealthiest counties in America. So I think he would make the case that he doesn't necessarily, at least at the time, didn't necessarily need a thriving metro area.
It's also important to not confuse short-term success with long-term success,
yeah.
and that maybe this can work for a couple of years or a decade, but it's not a prescription for long-term thriving region.
So I have been to this movie before. No, seriously, because I grew up in Portland, Oregon. I spent most of my career in Washington, D.C., and those are 2 cities. At some point didn't really have regional transit, and during my lifetime has exploded in regional transit. Here's the one thing, the mystery about regional transit that most people don't get. It's not about the urban areas. Actually, when I look at what regional transit did for the Washington, D.C. region, it wasn't that it grew Washington, D.C., it grew Vienna, Virginia. It grew Bethesda, Maryland. It grew Rockville, Maryland. All these areas that were kind of outposts exploded in growth. Same thing in Portland, Oregon. Hillsborough was essentially, in the Pacific Ocean. If you lived in Portland, because it was, it's a good 25-minute ride away without traffic. Once they put the light rail in, Intel went in there, and then the flow back and forth, that whole area between Hillsborough and downtown Portland is now completely developed. Yeah. And so it is an accelerator for suburban areas. And if you're not used to if you're not used to regional transit or having public transit, you assume you're never going to use it. But here I am a car guy, right? I'm a horsepower guy. I have 4 cars, right? One of them gets driven like 1,000 miles a year. So this is not anti-car, right? I take the people mover because if I'm going downtown, if I'm doing coming here, I can actually work my BlackBerry or iPhone or whatever the heck it's called without running into something, which is actually a good thing.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm not a car person. I would love to take transit everywhere. I can't wait till that's a viable option.
And the younger that you are in this question, the more likely you are to talk like that, right? I mean, we've got so many young people now who they're not waiting with bated breath to get their driver's licenses anymore. They'd rather rely on Uber. They don't want to own a car and have the insurance worries that come with it, all those things.
But absolutely, but I mean, we also have a community of existing people. We have businesses in the suburbs that need workers. We have workers in the suburbs who need to get to businesses elsewhere. We have lots of people in Detroit who need jobs that are clustered in the suburbs in a lot of times areas where smart service doesn't reach because they've opted out of the system.
Okay, then lastly, if we're willing to say and understand that we think that people are willing to buy in, then I guess the question becomes, is the plan right? Is it really what it needs to be? Is it comprehensive enough? Does it make sense to connect us in a way that we've, for whatever reason, over these decades not done? I can remember talking to John Hertel when he first started digging into, for instance, getting rail going. He visited a lot of places because there were a lot of questions about where do you start it, and the answer that he got time and again was it doesn't matter, just start, and everything will connect to it. So I guess there's that sense as you're creating this plan, just get it started, but is it the right plan?
Yeah, so listen, I'm not a transit expert, so I am.
You are for our purposes today. Now that you've gone through your Portland and Washington experience.
Then you have really scraped the bottom of the barrel in terms of expertise today. So listen, my understanding is the plan looks robust enough to get started, but the great thing about what we're trying to do here is that it's about rapid bus transit. The great thing about bus transit is that buses have steering wheels. They don't require, they don't require tracks, so we don't have to worry about making a mistake. If we make a mistake, let's redo a route. Let's rejigger things. We can do that. We know what the major arteries are in and out of the city, from the city into the suburban areas. We know it. So those are going to be rapid bus transit now. So all the other stuff that kind of fills that in, that's going to be a work in progress over time. I think the RTA has done a good job creating a good, solid start for that plan. I do expect that it'll need to be tweaked over time, and that's what that RTA board is there for, is to make these decisions as we go forward.
Nancy, it's a problem though. Rapid buses are used in lots of places in the world, but I think to a lot of people they're not sexy like talking about getting on a train.
So I actually think, I have a different take on why people aren't as excited about buses as trains. I don't think it's necessarily that they're not sexy. I think it's that buses are more confusing. If you get on a train, you know where it's going, because like you said, it can only go on those tracks. You get on a bus, what if you're on the wrong bus? What if it's going the wrong way? What if you wind up at 9 Mile and Van Dyke and you're lost? But partially what's good about the bus rapid transit is it goes in those dedicated lanes, you know where it's going. But I think it's incumbent on all of our transit systems to do a better job of helping people get where they need to go and understand how to use the system. And I think that's something the RTA board is very aware, and the authority itself is very aware of, and understands is a huge component of what it has to do. I mean, DDOT has made tremendous progress with its app to track buses. Needs some work, but it's they're moving toward it. You know, but that piece of helping people feel comfortable getting on the bus, that they're not going the wrong way. You know, how to ride the bus, and I think that's something we'll also all be a part of explaining as how the system is going to work as it develops. But that's what it's like I said, the train, you know where it's going.
It's a fair point.
The people mover goes in a loop.
We're
you can't
getting
get
there on
lost.
some of these things because the Detroit parking app is one of the things that just makes me truly happy.
So amazing.
It's such a better thing than what we had before. Thank you both very much.
Thanks,
we should all join hands with as much as you two agreed on. But that's going to do it. Thanks so much for being with us here on clickondetroit.com. Again, unfortunately, due to the Olympics, we will only be with you here on the web for these next couple of weeks. But don't worry, because there's plenty to discuss. We'll be right here on Click on Detroit. For Nancy Kaffer, Sandy Baru, I'm Devin Skillian. Have a great day.